thank you so much for having me here. Although I'm at New York University as a professor, I was born just outside Vancouver, so it feels like coming home. So it's really exciting to be here and talk to you about my research. I'm going to talk to you today about the science of misinformation and what we can do about it. If you want to read more about this, I have links to my book page and my website, and all the papers that I publish are there for free in PDFs if you want to do a deeper dive, or contact me and follow up about some of the questions or comments or ideas that come to your mind during this talk. Okay, so why should we care about misinformation? First, I'll ask for people to raise their hand if they think misinformation is a problem. Are they facing it? Are you dealing with it? So put your hand up, and now look around the room. Keep your hands way up. And so you can see that the room is overwhelmingly flooded with this as a problem. And I will say, if you put your hand up, you are not alone. This is from a group of about 1,500 experts in many different fields around the world that were asked by the World Economic Forum, what is the biggest and most severe risk that we are facing around the globe over the short term and the long term? And if you see over the next 2 years, the single biggest risk by this group of very diverse different experts around the world is misinformation and disinformation. Over the long run, of course, extreme weather events are very clearly, I think, going to be our bigger problem. But certainly in the short term, misinformation and disinformation. And I actually think that that's a bigger, deeper problem than a lot of the other ones because it underlies the problems that we're having with other things. So misinformation and disinformation makes it harder to have healthy conversations based on evidence about the weather and climate change. It is fueled by societal polarization and conflict within countries and nations. It's related to cyber insecurity. Spreading misinformation is a way that people lose trust in security. There are foreign actors, I'm going to show you some data on that, who engage in disinformation campaigns. And it's also involved in things like armed conflict. Spreading misinformation on social media, for example, has been linked to genocide in other parts of the world. So I like to think of misinformation as one of those core issues we're going to face no matter what field we're in going forward. Okay. If you just want it in dollars and cents and concrete numbers, this is data from Canada by one study found between just March and November 2021, so a very short period of time. Misinformation contributed to vaccine hesitancy for an estimated 2.35 million people in Canada. So that's nearly 1 in 2 people, or sorry, 1 in 10 people, 1 in 15 people about. It was associated with 198,000 fewer COVID cases if people had not been exposed to misinformation, 13,000 fewer hospitalizations, 2,800 fewer deaths just in that time window if people had not encountered misinformation about the COVID vaccine, and would have saved $300 million in hospital costs. That's just Canada, of course, and that's just in one tiny window. I looked it up for the United States. This is happening almost every day. This was a study that estimated the cost of misinformation and disinformation caused between $50 and $300 million worth of total harm every day since May 2021. That's a report from Johns Hopkins University. And so this is just a snapshot of some of the costs in 2 countries during a tiny window of time. And so this has led a lot of people to realize that maybe misinformation is one of maybe instead of 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, maybe it's the 5th. I like this quote by Ben Rosen on Twitter. He wrote, in 1990, scientists, we cloned a sheep. We landed a robot on Mars. Scientists today, for the last time, the Earth is round. And so it often feels like we are having these conversations where there's overwhelming evidence for something, and you're talking to someone who has been so entrenched in a diet of misinformation that they won't agree on basic facts and basic evidence and basic sources of evidence. They'll dismiss and wave away things that we take seriously. The New England Journal of Medicine, who cares about that? And so they don't operate under the same set of epistemic rules that the rest of us in society has been operating under for a long time, in part because they've been inhaling this content for so long. And part of what this content does is it doesn't just debunk or try to debunk certain scientific facts. What it also tries to do is sow distrust and discord in institutions. It's designed to make you distrust your doctor, or distrust public health officials, or distrust government officials who are conveying public health recommendations. And distrust, people like me, scientists. I'm going to show you some example of that in a minute. So this was from the World Health Organization, who used the word infodemic during the pandemic to describe the problem of misinformation and disinformation. And they said we need to flatten the infodemic curve. We need to stop the spread, the tsunami of misinformation. And part of the issue is that when people have misinformation, they share it. They spread it over email, they spread it over chats, gossip, they spread it on social media, and it cascades. And so that's part of what technology is doing. It makes it easier for a cascade of misinformation. 20 years ago, you would have been kind of on the sided corner of the street or in a park shouting into the void about all your conspiracy theories. Nowadays, you can blast it on social media to tens of thousands of people. And if it goes viral, then it will be seen by hundreds of thousands or millions. And so this is one of the problems with the modern technology that is available to us and how it's being misappropriated and misused. And people are profiting from this. So with vaccine misinformation, there was what were called the disinformation dozen. These were 12 accounts on Facebook who spread something like 65% of the misinformation on the whole platform. And if you go to their websites, it was generating a lot of engagement because misinformation is engaging. I'll explain why in a minute. And then people go to their websites and buy like herbal remedies to COVID. And so these people are profiting by creating and spreading misinformation. But other people pick it up or are exposed to it and they don't know. And so this is part of the problem. This is one of the main vectors of misinformation. Turns out the Joe Rogan podcast, I don't want to come down too hard on Joe Rogan, but his podcast, the average listeners per episode are something like 14 million. So that's about now half the population of Canada. It's, by the way, like the biggest news stations in the United States, something like Fox News Opinion on prime time is about 3 million people. So Joe Rogan goes out to 5 times as many people as the most popular news stations. And he has on people who are medical scientists and experts. He had on Sanjay Gupta during COVID. This is like the medical expert on CNN. But he also has on conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones, or people who spread misinformation about the vaccine like Robert Malone. Has anybody heard of Robert Malone? Okay, so I'll tell you a bit about him. So he claims he was actually involved scientifically, and he was on numerous papers for the science behind the COVID vaccines very early on, and then became very skeptical of the efficacy of vaccines and the pharmaceutical establishment and so forth. And so he went on Joe Rogan to talk about it. And I couldn't find a source of this, but at one point when this first broke, there was I saw a claim that this was listened to by 50 million people. This particular episode went super viral, and then it got fact-checked by pretty much every major media outlet because he was spewing all kinds of misinformation. And so that drove more people to go to the podcast and listen to it on YouTube or on Spotify. I was actually asked to fact-check one of the claims he had made on the podcast. So one thing Robert Malone had said to Joe Rogan is that everybody getting COVID vaccines is under what he said called mass formation psychosis. That there's a collective delusion equivalent to hypnosis, and that was accounting for the billions of people who are getting their vaccine. Because anybody thinking should know that it's not healthy for them. And so he coined this term. So I was asked, is there such thing as mass formation psychosis? And I had just spent the previous 5 years researching and writing a book on group behavior and group psychology, and I said, I have never even heard of that term, and it makes no sense, given everything that we know, hundreds and thousands of studies on group behavior, group psychology. And so I did a fact check for the Associated Press, and then they interviewed a few other experts, and I also looked up on things like Google Scholar, and there were no papers on mass formation psychosis. So it's not just that I hadn't encountered it or ever seen it and didn't think it made any sense, but there were no scientific studies on it. So it was made up whole cloth. And so as you can see, AP posted this fact check that was shared, many, many thousands of times on social media. And they concluded that it's an unfounded theory spreading online. suggesting millions of people have been hypnotized into believing mainstream ideas to combat COVID-19. But psychologists, experts, say the concept is not supported by evidence. I also got asked by Reuters and Vice magazine and a couple other places, and again, they interviewed me and some other and different experts at each place, and every single expert said the same thing. I'll put my quote. To my knowledge, there's no evidence whatsoever for this concept. And so you might think, okay, well, that's AP and Reuters are about as mainstream news as you can get. They just play it straight. They quoted multiple experts who all came to the same conclusion. Pretty boring fact-check story. But it went viral because a lot of the conspiracy theorists and people who distrust experts decided that the psychologists were now trying to trick them into believing there's no such thing as mass formation psychosis. And what happens when that goes viral online is usually there's a small number of people who spread and push this misinformation. So one of the main people who really didn't like this was Jack Posobiec. And he, if you go to the Hate Watch on Southern Poverty Law Center, he's linked to white supremacy movement. He's also a well-known conspiracy theorist. And so he blasted this and started tagging me in all these posts. Jay Van Bavel lied about Dr. Malone. He had to because he got caught as one of the architects of mass formation psychosis. So it's one of those things where when you see the world through a conspiratorial lens, people fact-checking misinformation are seen as part of the conspiracy. And the fact that I had done work on misinformation and debunking it, as well as psychology around COVID and polarization, that was just more and more fuel for the fire of the conspiracy theorists. Here's another one he wrote. He wrote this nonstop. I had to shut down all my social media accounts, by the way. And I got about 1,000 messages harassing me, contacting the university trustees and president to fire me. They even started sliding into my wife's DMs on other social media platforms and harassing her, because they start to dig into your whole life. And when this person has 1.5 million followers, and most of these people are conspiracy theorists, they are the type of people who will harass people endlessly. Here's another one he wrote that was fun. The thing about liars like Jay Van Bavel that is such a problem is that once they start lying, they can't stop. He knows I have all the receipts on him. I reported his own words, and his responses to delve in mind-numbing screechery and lies. They started creating memes about people like me and the fact checkers. There's no such thing as mass formation psychosis, as if we are all hypnotized ourselves, repeating this like a cult mantra. I like this. This is some Canadian content for you. Theo Fleury, famous NHL hockey player from the Calgary Flames, wrote, "Mass formation psychosis has now become more dangerous than COVID." Okay, so you see how they flip it. COVID, which killed, last estimate I think was like 20 million people around the globe, and hospitalized and impaired many others, is now less dangerous than this fake idea that's been perpetuated. So if you want to read more of it, here's the APA, American Psychology Association, did an anatomy of this. How many people here have been attacked for sharing facts? Online or with patients? Okay, so you can see there's like a couple dozen people in this room who've had this happen to them. And so this is something that is often a coordinated way of silencing people who present evidence. So it's not just that people are not listening to evidence or ignoring it or believing misinformation. There now are coordinated campaigns to harass and dismiss people. And as I said, the advice you get when this happens to you is to shut down all your social media platforms until they find another target that they're going to harass, because that's just, they move from one to the other. You can't engage with them. You can't have a back and forth. It just puts fuel to the fire. It's like the classic lesson from the internet: don't feed the trolls. Okay, so this is what's happening online. This is what's happening to experts, scientists, public health officials. Now, this is one part of it. The other part of it is that regular people get confused and misled and spread misinformation. This was from a paper in Science magazine. They found, with a huge analysis of tweets of information that had been fact-checked and was either true or false, they found that fake news spreads faster than true news on Twitter, thanks to people, not bots. So if we want to say that this is all just bots or a small number of bad actors, it's wrong. Most of it is spread by regular people online. They found that tweets containing falsehoods were 70% more likely to be retweeted than truthful tweets. So that's kind of what you're up against. The power of misinformation is stronger and more contagious and more viral than true information. partly because it's more interesting. It's more interesting and intriguing to hear a story about a conspiracy theory than it is just to hear another vaccine that's been approved by medical practitioners or another study on something. And so this is how it spreads online. And this is obviously, that's just from Twitter, now X. This was from about a week ago. There was an analysis of posts on TikTok. And TikTok has, I think, 1.5 to 2 billion users now around the world, which is much more than X or Twitter. And they found that when they looked at news stories, 20% of them, of the recommended videos on news topics, contain misinformation. That's 1 in 5 videos. And the videos move faster, they go viral quicker because the recommendation algorithm on TikTok is super aggressive. Here's what they found for medical misinformation. Searches for information about the mRNA vaccine, for instance, yielded 5 videos out of the first 10 that contain misinformation. So the medical misinformation is even more saturated than misinformation about other news topics. So you're kind of like in the worst corner of the information universe online, because most of the misinformation is, especially the viral stuff, is about the stuff that you do. And so you're going to be facing this tsunami as these platforms grow and influence and users. And by the way, in 2016, there were studies looking at who spreads misinformation. At that time, it was mostly older people. So people over 65 were something like 7 times more likely to share it than people who are young adults. But now with TikTok, that's mostly used by younger people. And so even the demographics of who is exposed to it and who shares it is changing in real time. And that's going to be even more of a problem as these individuals age into the medical system. And so I've been thinking about it through the lens of psychology. And so I like this quote by E.O. Wilson, who's a very famous biologist. He said, "The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And it is terrifically dangerous, and it is now approaching a point of crisis overall." And so this is a little bit what we're facing, is that humans are susceptible to misinformation, in part because it triggers our emotions. So if you go back to this study, the 2 factors they found that were associated with the spread of falsehoods, of misinformation, the first one was if it had emotional content, because these things are meant to trigger and pique our emotions, and that what makes us more likely to pay attention to them and spread them. The other thing is if they're political, if they connect to any political issues. And so this is why things like polarization become a risk factor, not only for distrust in institutions, but for the spread of misinformation, because bad political actors, propagandists will go into this space and spread this stuff. And so those are the types of things that underlie the spread of it. Those are human emotions, human psychology being weaponized against us. And then we have these institutions who are racing to fight it, but we don't have the modern tools, we don't have the wherewithal, and the technology is evolving so quickly that it's almost impossible to keep up with it. I know as a scientist, I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose of all these studies and all the new technological ways people are spreading and creating misinformation. I don't think this video will play, but this is a great video of a chimpanzee scrolling through Instagram. And if you've never seen this video, you can just do a Google search, chimp scrolling through Instagram. It's a YouTube video. And you will see how similar it is to you. That's what's terrifying about this video, because this is one of our evolutionarily closest ancestors, and the chimp is sitting there flipping through videos, clicking on ones, clicks on one with a snake because that triggers an emotion, scrolls through another one, finds one where he's getting a piggyback with with one of the humans that he likes. And so it's all about the exact same things, in a chimpanzee view, but the same type of psychology is happening for us. Okay, so the way we've been thinking about it, and what we've been finding over and over again, is a lot of misinformation spreads by triggering emotions in people. In particular, one of the key vectors is outrage. When people feel there's something that triggers an emotion, a strong emotion like outrage, it's very arousing, and it means they're more likely to share it. And then they trigger the people around them, and they're more likely to share it. And that's how it cascades out. And this is driven by a few things. It's driven by our identities. I already told you polarization is a vector for misinformation spread, because it motivates us, because we want to defend our side. And I don't just mean political polarization. It can be polarization around all kinds of identities in society. It could be religious. In many countries, it's kind of sectarian. or ethnic. And so these expose us to believing misinformation about other groups that we don't like. The other thing is this all operates in an attention economy. All of this is done because these are massive multi-billion-dollar companies who want to keep us online as long as possible. And so it's in their interest to amplify as much information as they can that will keep us online, because then they can show us more ads and make more profit. And it turns out that the information that keeps us online, one of the best triggers for keeping us engaged, is things that trigger strong emotions. We see them faster. My lab has found that they pop up in our visual attention easier. And this is important because if you have a smartphone like this is about 6 inches tall, you scroll this, average social media user scrolls through this 600 times a day. So if you stack that from floor up into the sky, that's 300 feet. That's how much news feed you're scrolling through on social media each day. That's the height of the Statue of Liberty. Okay, so you can't possibly read all of that. And so the way that you pay attention to it is things pop out that look interesting. And this is the type of information that pops out to us visually, that grabs our attention and makes us want to engage. Things that drive our strong emotional responses: morality, emotions, politics. And then the last piece, of course, is that, as I said, the companies profit from this. So they have design features designed to get us engaged, and one of those is the artificial intelligence they use. And so there's a new paper looking at the Twitter algorithm, X algorithm, and the default for you if you log, how many people here have used Twitter or X? Okay, so about maybe a quarter of the audience. If you go there, the first thing you see by default is stuff that's being fed to you by the algorithm. You can opt out of it, but that's the default. And that's also the default on Facebook, the default on TikTok, the default on LinkedIn. They are all structured in a way to give you algorithmically curated content. And at least on Twitter or X, most of the content is things that are driving outrage, because it makes people comment a lot, and that pushes it up in everybody else's feed. It's not based on what is factual, or what is educational, or what is nuanced or thoughtful. It seems to be things that just foster strong emotional reactions. And that's what they keep feeding us, because it triggers other people to respond to it. And so all of these are feeding into one another. The technology, the attentional economy, and these design features to keep us hooked online as many hours a day. And so now the average user, I said, scrolls through 300 feet of social media. The average user of social media is online for 3 hours a day. We'll do another little survey here. How many people checked their social media last thing before they went to bed last night? Put your hand up, don't be embarrassed. Now keep your hand way up, look around. Now how many people checked it first thing this morning? Keep your hands up. Okay, so look around, that's about like a quarter of the room. And by the way, that's probably me too. For many people, that is the only thing that's blocking you from being online continuously is unconsciousness. So you are on there nonstop, right? And so that's, again, you're not alone. The average user spends about 3 hours a day, and there's 5 billion social media users across all platforms now in the world. And this can be good. So this can lead to social change. So this is data from the first 12 hours of the Me Too movement, which was really leveraging social media to spread information about sexual assault, sexual harassment of women. You can see it started in North America, but within 12 hours, because of social media, spread around the world. And this has changed a lot of institutions. It led a lot of harassers and abusers being fired, like Harvey Weinstein, in many industries, including in academia. I know people who lost their job because after this, they got exposed as being engaged in harassment and abuse. And so those things, I think, are quite good. That's one of the powers of social media. But it can also be weaponized against us by playing to our psychology. So I've been studying this with my lab for the last decade or so, and we've looked at what are the words and language that spreads, that becomes a vector for things like misinformation. And in our first study, we analyzed over 500,000 posts on Twitter around kind of hot button political topics like gun control, same-sex marriage, and climate change. This gives you just kind of a look at a word cloud of some of the words that were popular when we looked at the climate change messages. And what we found is when people use moral, emotional words, like that disgusts me, makes me so angry, I'm filled with contempt. For every single moral, emotional word you put in a message, it's roughly 20% more likely to be shared. If you put 4 or 5 words like that in a message, it doubles the chances of it being shared. And so you're getting lots more engagement and feedback, and your message is spreading, right? And that's what most people want to do on social media, is generate engagement, get more followers, get more likes. When we looked at who was sharing it, when people use the words moral emotional language, suddenly it was a bit of a double-edged sword. It was going more viral, but only among like-minded people. So if you were a liberal, it was spreading among liberal people. If you're a conservative, it's spreading among conservative people. If you don't use this language but talk about the exact same topics, you don't see this kind of echo chamber effect. People are much more likely to engage with and share people who disagree with them. But if you use moral emotional words, our research has found that it signals to people that you're hardcore on the issue, that you're pretty uncompromising, you're seen as more closed-minded, and people don't want to engage with you who don't agree with you. And so language like this is good for going viral, but it's bad for persuasion. So understand that, but you're not seeing that because you only see the likes and retweets and shares and followers going up. You don't see the potential downside that you're not persuading people. And so that's the dynamic of that language. And so when we use this language, you have to be careful about it because it can be beneficial in one way, but it can alienate people who might be open-minded or future allies. We looked at another study at this and found the same pattern, but we found something even more strong that determines the spread of news online, not only now on Twitter, but also on Facebook, which has 2.5 billion users. We found that each term referring to a political outgroup increased the odds of social media posts being shared by 67%. So simply dunking on another group, sharing content that makes another group look bad, the outgroup look bad, is really the key to virality. We also looked at those little emoticons that are popular on Facebook, and the single biggest one is the angry emoji. When you share this, people post that angry emoji, and Facebook has conditioned its algorithm so that when people put that little angry emoji, it pops up in everybody else's feed. That's a little trick you can do if you want to get people to watch your thing on Facebook. Hit the angry emoji or write the word congratulations in the comments. Because everybody, if it says congratulations, usually an engagement, a wedding, a new baby, a new home, that pops up a lot. But other than that, the angry emoji is one of your keys to getting attention. And so content that drives anger is the content that goes viral. Because that's how they've created their algorithm. They want to feed more and more anger. And so we've been studying this. In my own lab, we've created a dictionary of words that were the most polarizing, and we've looked online at how trolls use this language, how this language is related to things like public health. Here's our paper if you want to see it or use the dictionary. And we found that these polarizing words divide people, and it can divide people around public health issues. So this was a study we did in the US and the United Kingdom for this one, and we found we were looking at vaccine attitudes online, there was a huge amount of polarization, and it was more polarized in the US, but it was also polarized in the UK. And so liberal or left-leaning networks online were more likely to trust or support vaccines than right-leaning networks. When we looked at who they were following that were associated with vaccine trust or distrust, the 2 single biggest figures in all of our data, in all of the United States at least, relating to vaccine distrust, Joe Rogan and Candace Owens. They were the people who followed them online were the most likely to distrust vaccines. In fact, only 27% of their followers plan to get vaccinated. So think of how low that is. Your hope of reaching anything close to herd immunity is going to be exceedingly low if you're dealing with audiences that have that much distrust. And so they're getting it by following the content from certain people who in overt or subtle ways are signaling distrust of vaccines. When people are using this polarizing language around COVID, what we found is it was a really good predictor of public attitudes. So when we looked on these data were from Twitter. When we looked, this was in the early phases of the pandemic, by the way, March of 2020. In the early phases of the pandemic, when people were using polarizing language about COVID and the risks, this predated the vaccines, by the way, by at least a year. What we found is that predicted public attitudes on national surveys about risks associated with the vaccine. And so what you saw is that people were talking about it in ways that were very polarizing, that polarized public attitudes. In fact, at this time, there was data from Canadian political scientists who analyzed the social media accounts of political leaders in Canada from the Liberals, Conservative Party, NDP. And what they found is that there was pretty much uniform language around the severity of the risk. And then they found that public surveys also found it didn't matter in Canada at that time if you were liberal or conservative, people saw the risk of COVID as nearly identical. And so this was in the US when the language around it was polarized, it provided a huge public health risk because it seemed to be associated with changing public beliefs about COVID. We've also looked at how this language is weaponized by foreign actors who spread disinformation. So when we looked at Russian trolls, so these are accounts that were operated by Russia, they've been using more and more of this polarizing language over time, and this is used in lots of different countries to stir up conflict. When we compare them to just average Americans, they're not using this language more, but the Russian trolls are using it more and more. They seem to be finding that it triggers division in the way they want. And this has been linked to things not just misinformation about public health. This was from January 6th, from the insurrection in the US. My lab was approached by the New York Times to try to analyze the rhetoric of political leaders to see, are they using this language? Is it associated with anti-democratic behavior? And this was from an article in the New York Times. What we found is that polarizing language is being used more and more and more over the last 10 years. And you can see it spiking in recent years among political leaders. So the average American might not be using it more, but political leaders are using it to trigger and control and manipulate people. They're also using it in like their emails to followers. And then there's something really interesting here, that the people using it most in the last couple years, by the way, the light gray were Democrats. There was a period around 2018 where some Democrat leaders were using it more. And then it switched to almost entirely Republicans. But the Republicans who were using it more were really broken into two different groups. I'll say regular Republicans who are using the polarizing language, not that much, and those who voted to overturn the election. So these are anti-democratic electors. Those are the people using it the most. It's the people who are most invested in overturning democratic outcomes. And so that is a suggestion that the people who are going to be using this and manipulating people are the people who are less committed to the welfare of society. And that even within political parties, there's often disagreement about the values and goals of the party. I've been trying to study for the last, I want to make sure I have 8 minutes left. What you can do to get people, so there's lots of things like how our identities make us susceptible to misinformation, because we want to believe things that make us feel a sense of belonging, that make us feel better about the groups we belong to, that help us win and gain status. What we need to do is think of how we can make people value accuracy more, how we can make them place a higher value on that. And so that's what we've been trying to do in my lab, is how can you motivate people to care about accuracy? And I'm going to show you some evidence that we can incentivize accuracy. With a little incentive, you can actually get rid of a lot of this misinformation sharing. You can align the identities with accuracy by making it clear that the norms of your group value accuracy. Or you can create more inclusive identities, so people feel less at odds with one another and more part of something bigger. And all of those seem to work. So I'm going to show you a couple quick studies. This was from my postdoc, Steve Rathje. We gave people just $1 for spreading accurate information in a study, and we ran this across 4 large experiments. And what we found is just simply giving people $1 for being accurate makes them more accurate. They're less likely to spread and believe misinformation. The other thing that was cool is this reduced differences in belief between people who are on the left and people who are on the right. They actually started to have a shared sense of reality. And what the effect of this was a good intervention because it reduced partisan bias by 30%. What we found was happening here is when people have an incentive, what they're actually willing to do is share true information that makes their party or their side look bad. And that's hard for people to do. They don't want to admit that something bad happened in their group, so they normally suppress it or disbelieve it, but they're more open-minded about it and willing to believe it if they have an incentive. We also found social incentives work. If you think that you're part of a group that cares about you sharing accurate information, that also dramatically reduces the spread of misinformation. So it's not just money that matters, it's any type of social norm or social value or group value that you can communicate to people, because people want to fit in. They want to fit into communities they care about, and if you can communicate to them that their community cares about this, they're more likely to place a value and be thoughtful and care about being accurate. There's no effects here of your cognitive ability. We looked at like people's cognitive reasoning ability. So it's not just that when people spread misinformation, it's not just because they're intellectually unable or not curious or not thoughtful. It's that they're not motivated. And so you really need to think about what you can do to motivate people to care. Obviously in health, people should care because it affects their well-being. Another thing we found you could do is signal that people in your group, that there's a norm that they found some things misleading. And so we compared this to other types of interventions. So Twitter used to have a warning label that would appear on screen if something was fact-checked by moderators that was misleading. There's also research using accuracy nudges, trying to get people to think a little bit before they share something. We found that those work, but they're not very effective, especially for polarizing information like the kind related to medical issues or COVID. We found that what works much, much better is simply if you, for example, were to add a button or help people see that other people in their group found it misleading. So imagine you could go to an online world where it's not just how many retweets or shares or likes people had, but did other people find it misleading? And if you can see that, and especially if we tell you that those are people like you, it dramatically reduces misinformation sharing. In fact, this reduced misinformation sharing by 25%. And it was 5 times more effective than accuracy nudges, which are right now very popular. Facebook is using them and testing them. Those things simply aren't powerful. What matters is what your community believes. And if you can see your community finds that misleading, it's a really powerful way of opening your mind to that something might be false. And this worked really well. In fact, it worked even better for polarizing content than other types of content, and it worked across the political aisle. It didn't matter if you were on the left or the right. It didn't matter if we did this in the US and the UK. Worked very well in both contexts. So that suggested, again, motivating people and revealing to them that there's a norm that other people find it misleading is very helpful. And so this is related to some work we're currently doing. This is with, I'm partnering with the Clarity Foundation, led by David Sweet, and we're gonna be running a misinformation workshop in a few hours today. I look forward to those of you who are joining us. We're gonna dig into this. But what we've been trying to do is use these scientific findings and other scientific research to reveal to people what others believe. And the goal here is to try to fight misinformation, and it's primarily focused in healthcare. It was started in BC, but we're trying to spread it out across Canada, and we're interested in fighting misinformation in other places as well. You can go, there's our website if you want to check it out, or talk to us after if you're interested in partnering. One thing that we're trying to do, and we found, is that people still trust their local medical health care provider. So their family doctor, for example. There's more distrust in politicians. There's more distrust in public health experts or scientists like myself. But there's still a lot of trust with your family doctor. And so what we decided to do, based on a paper that we found, is that can you reveal to people what family doctors believe? Can you surface that information about the COVID vaccine? And so we teamed up with doctors here in BC, and BC Infectious Diseases and Critical Care Societies. And we surveyed them with a confidential survey. And what we found is that when we asked them simple questions like, are COVID vaccines safe and effective in adults? 99% agree. Are COVID vaccines safe and effective in young children? Already 89% agreed. This was from a year ago. And when we looked at pediatric infectious disease specialists, their opinion on young children was 100% agree. And so what we did here is we simply tried to surface information about a really trusted group of people that regular citizens trust, regardless of their political background or identity or community they come from. And this is what we found, is overwhelming evidence. So we're trying to find what people believe and then communicate those opinions to the public. We're planning more projects along these lines. And so that's another thing you can do, is surface what trusted individuals believe. And so this is a couple tips to fight misinformation. You can leverage trusted sources like what family doctors believe to counter misinformation and provide accurate health information. That works. Research shows that works. Or you can do things like using misinformation correction strategies that promote healthy behaviors. And my research I showed you finds that incentives and social norms are 2 really powerful ways to do that. You can also do education, teaching kids. My 10-year-old son, already in school at 10 years old, he's learning the difference between opinion and fact. Because it turns out we haven't done a good job of teaching people that, and they get confused. And so, education about this is really important. But I was also on a teamed up with the Center for Disease Control and American Psychology Association to come up with a team of experts about other consensus interventions. So these were two of the top ones, but there are 4 others I want to share with you. And if you're going to screenshot one page, this would be it. Avoid repeating misinformation without including a correction. So some people will try to repeat the challenge, the thing that was spread, but you've got to correct it every time so people know the truth. You need to debunk misinformation often. It turns out that repeatedly hearing misinformation makes you more likely to believe it. So you have to repeat the truth over and over and over again, because for people, hearing something over and over again is a heuristic that something's true. So you're going to have to fight back by constantly repeating the true information over and over again. You can engage in what's called pre-bunking, which is if you know some misinformation is going to circulate widely, get out in front of it. It's almost like an inoculation. You expose people to it in advance and explain why it's wrong, and then when they encounter it in the wild, they've got an immunity to it. So think of the same idea here about misinformation. It's actually based on inoculation theory. So it's based on the idea that you can inoculate people just the same way you do with medical vaccines. And it works, super effective, by the way. And then the other thing is I think there needs to be more collaboration with the media and social media about what we can do to fight misinformation. And so you have to take an active role with those mechanisms. Here's our report. You can dig it up. It's with the Center for Disease Control and American Psychology Association. And these are things that I'm largely talking about at the individual level, pre-bunking, debunking. But we also have to think about these system level factors. There's right now in the United States, there's a potential ban on TikTok. It just got voted on by Congress a couple days ago. So there might be regulations coming that fight some of these system level problems. Okay, finally I'm going to say here that we are working with HQBC on a health initiative. This is with Clarity. So we're excited to be teaming up with you and hopefully that we can expand on this work. So thank you so much. This is part of the HQBC Childhood Vaccine Misinformation Coalition that HQBC has initiated in this space. And then my last thing is, thank you so much. Again, here's the websites if you want to learn more. If any of the studies that you found of mine that you want to download or read, they're on my website there. We also have a free newsletter for my lab for all our research every month if you want to read about it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.